Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our annual International Women's Day event at Norman Disney & Young. It's fantastic to have you all here today. My name is Joseph, and I'm one of the directors here in the Melbourne office. We traditionally do a welcome to country arrangement, as you might see quite commonly. And today, I'd like to do something a little bit different than you might ordinarily see. The Geelong North Shore. Anyone been there? Yeah, fantastic place. And so you're asking yourself, Joss, why are you talking to me about Geelong North Shore? Well, it's about 60 kilometres from where we are today. And if you consider translating time into distance, when you look at our Indigenous nation that spans something like 60,000 years in this nation, the time in this place is very important. And if you consider where we are, we're at Festival Hall. We didn't even make Burke Street in our time in this place. So I think it's a little bit of a different way to reflect on certainly our custodians in this land. So I'll move on. International Women's Day. It celebrates achievements of women. So that's fantastic. It's a range of achievements: social, economic, professional, cultural. It's an action in celebrating gender equality. I reflect on my own circumstance. I've got 3 beautiful girls, and my hopes and aspirations for my 3 girls are high. And if I think about my hopes and what I see today, they don't actually align. There is a difference between what I hope for my 3 girls and what I see in our society, particularly in the workplace. So that inspires me to do more, and I hope that resonates with some of you. NDY has done a lot of good stuff, certainly in recent years, around pushing the gender equality matter forward. So we come from a very male-dominated industry. We participate in a bunch of industry forums. We've also implemented a bunch of policies and initiatives that are really supporting our progress. And they include from flexible working arrangements. We do a gender pay gap review at NDY, where we genuinely look at whether we have pay gap issues and we fix it. We also have a fairly well-established diversity and inclusion program. And so that's demonstrating progress among a range of fronts in our D&I agenda. But I'd also acknowledge that at times we do fail. And it's important that as an organisation and as individuals, we can recognise when we do fail, acknowledge it, and try again. Deal with it and try again. And then if we fail, we try again. And so that's an ongoing journey for all of us in our lives. On that note, it's important to note that the Workplace Gender Equality Agency has recognised NDY in what's only about 120 organisations across Australia. So we've certainly hit that mark for the 2nd year in a row as a employer of choice for gender equality. So I think we should be, as NDY, proud of that achievement that we've been able to implement for the 2nd year in a row, and we will continue to do that. And I think that we will only get better. And for our staff that are here, you can actually look at our submissions that support those applications. So it's important that we continue on that journey and demonstrate that that's quite an achievement that we should be proud of as a business, as an organisation. We have an impressive panel here today to talk a bunch of interesting topics. So you're not going to hear a whole lot more from me, and I'm going to welcome Sarah to the stage, our Marcoms, to introduce and facilitate our panel. So welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Joss. For those of you who haven't met me before, my name is Sarah Dawson and I'm the Head of Marketing Comms at NDY. I'm quite new in the role and this is a really great start to my tenure here at NDY. And I'm really excited today to introduce three really exceptional women to our panel, to talk about International Women's Day and what it actually means to them. But before we begin, I'd like to invite each of our panellists to introduce themselves and talk about their career journeys to date. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Carolyn Bonny from Vicinity Centres. So Carolyn is actually the Chief Development Officer at Vicinity Centres. It's a role she's held since October 2016. She has more than 20 years experience in construction, property development and real estate investment. And prior to joining Vicinity Centres, Carolyn was with Grocon, where she held a number of senior roles, including CEO, Deputy CEO and Head of Development. Carolyn is an advisory board member to the Victorian Government's Office of Projects Victoria and also the organisation Women's Property Initiatives. She's also a non-executive director of the Big Issue, Homes for Homes and the Walter and Liza Hall Institute of Medical Research. Carolyn is a former president of the Victorian Division of the Property Council of Victoria. So please join me in welcoming Carolyn. Thanks.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I might begin by, I think I've got some slides that I'm allowed to click with. There we go. I might begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet this morning and pay my respects to elders past and present. Thank you, NDY, and thank you for that warm welcome. And happy International Women's Day, everybody. And if I can also acknowledge my fellow panellists, Dr. Rebecca Koss and Johanna Trickett. I think the idea is that we get to know each other a little bit before we launch into what I'm sure is going to be a great panel discussion. So when I was thinking about that, apart from the formal CV, which everyone wants to read out at the beginning, what else would I want you to know about me? Well, my current role, as Sarah mentioned, is as Chief Development Officer at Vicinity Centres. I actually hate the title Chief Development Officer. I don't know why I can't just be the Executive General Manager Development or something like that in a traditional way. But we had a whole range of roles that changed about 2 years ago, where a range of my male peers ended up with Chief at the beginning of their title. So they felt that I also needed to be a Chief. I would have been happy with the role title the way it was, but there was came from a good place anyway. So Vicinity is an ASX listed property company. We own and manage about $26 billion worth of assets across the country. The company is the merger between what was the Colonial First State Retail Fund Trust, for that Gandel Group, and then the other part of the business and the assets come from Federation Centres and Centro. The pedigree of both businesses is mostly retail, but increasingly we are very focused on a mixed use agenda, which is about looking at the potential of that real estate and transforming those assets, which are largely a single or maybe even two-storey building with retail in them and a sea of car parking, looking at that real estate and saying, what are all the other things that we would do with that real estate in 2020, 2030, 2040, 2050? And fundamentally, from my point of view, that means transforming what are traditional retail assets into great places that people love, that they want to be in and they want to connect with other people. It involves a capital spend of about $3 billion over the next 3 or 4 years, and introducing things like offices and hotels and residential and service departments, and you've seen us do some of that stuff already at places like the Glen in Glen Waverley and the hotel and the office at Chadstone and so on. Prior to Vicinity, I spent 13 years at Grocon, and I know a lot of people in the room from my time there. Various roles from in-house counsel through to Head of Development, Deputy CEO and CEO. Grocon is undoubtedly a very different business today than it was then, but in any respect, when I think about Grocon and my time there and the 50 years before that, it's undoubtedly known for and best remembered for conceiving and delivering some of Melbourne and Australia's most memorable buildings, like Rialto and the MCG, Amy Park and Eureka Tower in Melbourne, and Governor Phillip Tower and 1 Blythe Street and that Ilford building in Sydney and their parallels in Queensland. So I might add that NDY was a key consultant on almost all of those buildings. Having said all that, I began my career as a property lawyer working for Minter Ellison. I studied law in part because I was accepted into the degree, but also as an impressionable teenager there was a show, I'm showing my age now, a great show on TV called LA Law, which depicted the life of a lawyer as both interesting and glamorous. And the men in the firm in the show were sexy as hell. And let me tell you, this was very different to my experience at Minter Ellison. When I resigned at Minters, I had a lot of fun there and learnt a lot. The partner who worked for me said, "Oh, Carolyn, if you needed a job, I would have helped you get a proper job," which wasn't particularly inspirational. And on day one at GrowCon, I wasn't sure at all that he hadn't got it entirely wrong. I had completely underestimated the magnitude of the change of going from a tier 1 law firm in a big tower in the city to a high profile but nevertheless private business as a builder and developer. And when my husband called me at lunchtime on day one to see how the new gig was going, I really had to do all that I could not to actually cry. And I'm not really a crier, so that was saying something. And that was from my desk in the tight confines of this side office that we had in Lonsdale Street at QV, where my desk was literally situated directly outside the men's bathroom. I did wonder, what have I got myself into? But both then and now, I've often reflected on the training that really great companies provide their staff, that these kind of organisations make a really big investment in their people in general and their young people in particular, and NDY is no different, I'm sure. I certainly saw myself as a beneficiary of that training and investment. Having said that, once I was the client, as opposed to just advising the client, it was always going to be pretty hard for me to do anything else, and it was really then that I began my love affair with buildings. More specifically, that my interest is in how people use buildings and the realisation that what we all do every day in the built form space is super important and in fact really, really special, that it leaves a big mark on the cities in which we live and work, and that we owe it to ourselves and the future generations to make sure that what we leave behind is exceptional in all respects. And that doesn't need to mean expensive or fancy, but rather that it's well considered, fit for purpose, and matches and hopefully exceeds the expectations of the people who we're delivering these buildings for. That's one aspect of what I love about what I do. The other is the amazing teams of people who you get to work with along the way. And in real estate, I think one of the best things is that none of these buildings happen, in fact, without lots and lots of people across lots of organisations coming together and collaborating really well to put a project together and see it delivered. So a constant reminder of what people are capable of, innovative thinking, extreme problem solving, and just the hard grind of getting a project up and delivered. And also a reminder of how many wonderful professionals work in our industry. Tough, sometimes brutal, but I feel very lucky to have been a part of it. Most days when I come to work, I don't think about being a woman. That's not to say, one, that I haven't been hit on in a professional capacity. I was young once. Two, found myself feeling slightly uncomfortable when I'm literally the only female at a dinner table of 30 or 40 men. Three, back when, having found myself feeling uncomfortable when I'm the only person aged south of 50. Or four, for reasons that still aren't clear, found myself in meetings where my male peers think I'm there to take the notes. Most days, I just focus on the job I have to do. Projects are a big part of my role, but so too is keeping an eye and an ear out for the actions and behaviours of the people in my own team and the broader Vicinity business if they run counter to each for equal. And with age, got lots of that now, and experience, a bit of that too, being prepared to call it out when I see it. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Carolyn. Next, we'll introduce Dr. Rebecca Koss, who's a sustainability professional. Rebecca's a senior sustainability professional with over 20 years' experience in environment, conservation, science, policy and management. She's currently Senior Communications Engagement Advisor for the Victorian Commission for Environmental Sustainability, where she authored the inaugural State of the Yarra and its Parklands 2018 report and co-authored the Victorian State of Environment 2018 report. Rebecca has served as a board member of Central Coastal Board and has a reputation for her expert knowledge across sustainability stewardship, sustainability and implementation of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And she holds a PhD in Conservation and Environmental Management as a Global Executive MBA. So please join me in welcoming Rebecca.
Thanks very much for the lovely introduction. As you can see, I'm vertically challenged and I just need to push it down a bit further. Thank you, NDY, and also Joss for inviting me to speak today. It's just wonderful to celebrate with everybody International Women's Day, and also Carolyn and Johanna to share the panel with you today is also really exciting for me too. I'd also like to thank the elders and emerging leaders of the Kulin Nation. So where we are today, where the Yarra River, the Maribyrnong River enters into Port Phillip Bay, is a really important place for the Kulin Nation. This is an area where they came together to trade, to actually arrange marriages, and it was really important for their food and also economic prosperity. And if you ever get an opportunity to go on country with elders, they'll share their cultural knowledge with you. And what really resonates with me is that they don't look at environment, societal needs, and economic prosperity separately. It's actually a very tightly integrated knowledge set, which we can learn a lot from. And actually, this approach is the foundation of what I want to talk to you about today. I have a PowerPoint presentation, and being a scientist, I know that freaks a lot of people out. They're probably going to expect tables, graphs, and it's far too early on a Friday morning to do that, and I haven't had enough espressos to do that either, so I'm not going to do that to you. I just want to explain the Commissioner for Environmental Sustainability is an independent and impartial office. Dr. Gillian Sparks is the Commissioner, and she's wonderful if you get to meet her. She has a background actually in mining and waste, and she was elected by the bipartisan support to be a Commissioner, and this is her second term. And we do a lot of the state of reporting, so state of the Yarra, state of the environment, state of the forest and so on. It's quite an exciting office. There's only 8 of us, and we work in a very cross-functional way to ensure that our reports have a lot of punch. And our reports also get tabled in Parliament with recommendations to which the Minister for Environment needs to respond to. So it's not just doing reports for report's sake, but actually trying to change the system to improve what's currently occurring. So this year's themes, Each for Equal, is very important. And with my personal and sustainability lens, equality goes beyond gender for me. It goes to societal equality. It means that no one should be living in poverty. We should all have equal rights to education, to food, a place to live, housing, and to feel protected and safe. It's also the year for the Sustainable Development Goals, call to action. And just very quickly, has anyone heard of or seen about the SDGs? Yep, one few people, great. Does anybody know what they are or how they're implemented? One person up the back. Another person over here. Great, fantastic. So just to give a quick background, the Sustainable Development Goals were created by the United Nations. So it's a pre-procreated framework and tool to understand the interactions between society, economics, the natural environment, politics, and also the judicial system as well. I think it's a great framework. It's not a perfect framework, but I think it's a great framework because you can start to see the interactions between these elements and how these actually play out in our society. Specifically, you'll see that goal number 5 is gender equality, which is today's theme, and so therefore sustainability and equality go hand in hand for me. So I'm just going to share with you briefly why I like this systems mindset to doing sustainability. Over the past 3 to 4 years, we've experienced quite a lot of drought, which have contributed to the fires that we saw over this summer season. And I promise that's as depressing as my presentation will be. But up until this summer, when things got quite real with climate change, when I used to tell people about what I do outside of the sustainability sector, I could see their body language change a little bit, and they had this look come over their face, and I knew that they were thinking this. That I just go around being a hippie, trust fund hippie or something, drinking my matcha almond milk lattes and telling everyone to love the environment. And actually quite a few times, people who would joke around with me would actually verbally say, oh, you're just a hippie, you're just a greenie. And then the discussion got even more interesting when we dived deep into actually what's my expertise. And I'm actually a marine scientist, and you could see that they thought I did this all day long. So I just want to say that I don't actually need flotation devices to stand up in water. And although, yes, it would be lovely to work with dolphins all day, dolphins is just one species in a huge marine ecosystem, and they're a charismatic species, and I understand they're quite smart and social. But my interest goes a little bit more beyond just dolphins. And the reality of my job was more like this. So this is, sorry, it's a bit blurry, but this is me diving in Port Phillip Bay in the middle of winter, 18 metres down, it's 9 degrees. I'm wearing a 7mm wetsuit with a lot of weights to keep me down. It's quite choppy. It's 7 a.m. and I had to do some counting and recording of data. So in my hand you'll see a reel. It's 200 metres in length. And what you do is you set it out and then you swim along the length of that reel, and 1 metre each side you have a recording board. You have to take down which fish you see, if you see lobsters, crabs, etc., the types of seaweed, and you have to do that a few times up and down to ensure you've got all the data. You come up and then you have to take a break for a few minutes so you don't get the bends, and then you go back in. So by midday on that day, we had done 3 dives by lunchtime. It was cold. We were a little bit, hypothermic by the time we got back to shore, but it's a lot of fun. And through this role, it really taught me that we need to think about the natural environment in a systems mindset. So in the marine environment, there's a lot of inputs: carbon dioxide, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, fresh water, as well as the pollutants that we create as humans. The outputs are things like fish, crabs, things that we eat, also carbon absorption, protection of the coast from coastal erosion. So it's really important to consider inputs and outputs in part of the system, and then also as a society, how are we interacting with that system and how does that change all the processes? So with a sustainability lens, it's a circular process, it's not a linear. And how we impact that process will also mean how much is available to us in the future to eat, for protection and for fresh air and fresh water services. And I think to be a sustainability leader, you need to have that systems mindset. A lot of scientists dive deep into the passion project area, which is great, but they have a difficult time, and I mean this respectfully, coming back up. And that's sort of what I bring to the table. As a marine scientist too, there's quite often a lot of times where I've been the only female on the dive boat. So similar to what Carolyn, you were saying, the only female at the dinner table. Once down in Tasmania, I had to do a 4-day dive off the coast of Maria Island to do a whole bunch of data collection, and I was the only female. But I didn't think about it until the head of the dive research project came up to me and said, you may not want to come out on top of the deck first thing in the morning. And I was like, why? And he said, the guys just might, be, using the ocean to do things. And I'm like, okay. Just didn't ask questions. Just, I stayed in my cabin until a little bit later on in the morning. So yeah, for me as well, I don't think that I'm the only female there. I just feel like I'm part of the group and part of the conversation. I also want to debug the myth that sustainability is purely just about the natural environment. It actually is how economics, social values and the natural environment interacts together, and it's very much a long-term view. So where does this all come together? So if I apply the SDGs framework to my thinking and to the work that I do, and specifically to gender equality, there are different elements. So for gender equality itself, yes, it's an important element, and there's aspects to it that we need to improve, things that we're doing well, but it can be improved. but also there's other elements that will influence whether we get to gender equality. And I've circled a few of these on behind me. So it's things like quality education, no poverty, ensuring good health and wellbeing, and also opportunities for women in the workplace too, through decent work and economic growth. And so you can see that gender equality is influenced by other inputs, but also has a lot of outputs too that can benefit society. So I personally think that as society, we have the power to create that change. Even though I work in government, I don't think we need to wait for government to have those incentives for us to create that change. And I think we also need to move away from having a conversation that's in binary opposition to each other. It's the space in the middle where the solutions come. And I think having those open and transparent conversations in the middle will actually allow us to move towards greater gender equality and also equality just generally. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rebecca. And lastly, and certainly not least, I'd like to introduce our very own Johanna Trickett. Johanna is, I guess, a sustainability superstar in our minds anyway. She's got a diverse background with roles such as architecture, sustainability and ESD consulting. This range of design and engineering and stakeholder engagement experience informs every project she works on, and we're really excited to have her on our team. During her 14 years of local and international industry experience, Johanna has developed a keen eye for design-centred sustainability solutions. She is a certified passive house designer and director for partnerships with the Australian Passive House Association, with a great passion to establish his world-leading energy performance and indoor comfort standard in Australia. So please join me in welcoming Johanna.
Good morning, everyone. Wrong direction. Okay, so each for equal. Why are we actually here? I have to admit, when I was first asked to talk today, I didn't feel particularly comfortable about it. And it's not because I don't like presenting or talking. I actually talk a lot and I really enjoy it, but typically I talk about building physics, that's my topic. Gender equality is not quite my topic. And I have to say it's also a bit of a tender topic, especially as a woman talking about it. As a woman it feels like, look at me, I'm so disadvantaged. It feels really uncomfortable. But equally, it could also mean, look at me, I've done so amazing despite being disadvantaged. And the reality is none of those are applicable to me. And the other thing, I think you, Rebecca, touched on it, talking about gender equality as a woman, you quite easily are being perceived as being a feminist, an activist, which I'm not. But as you said, as a sustainability consultant, let's face it, we're seen as being tree huggers and activists anyway. So I thought I may as well talk about, gender equality as well. So bring it on. My personal story starts with the triple F factor. And I came up with the triple F factor about maybe 10 years ago when I was talking to my husband one evening and I was complaining to him about a situation at work I wasn't happy about, and I said to him, no wonder, because I have got the triple F factor. And he looked at me, what's the triple F factor? And I said, yeah, okay, I just made it up. But let's face it, I'm female, I'm foreign, and I'm in my fertile years. So let me tell you what the triple F factor actually means. So being female in a male-dominated industry, which the building construction industry is, sometimes feels like being an exchange student in a foreign country. You look different, you speak different, you behave different, and no matter how hard you try, you just don't fit in. Talking about foreign. So I'm German, been here for 15 years, and I still remember the day when I said goodbye to my parents at the airport and they handed me this very heavy dictionary saying, good luck. Thank you. So I have to say languages never was my forte at school. I'd had other skills. So 15 years on, living in Melbourne as a foreigner, being German, although most people think I'm South African, I guess I still walk around with this accent, and I still have my moments where someone may present, a colloquialism and think it's really funny, and I just don't get it. Sorry, I didn't grow up here. It's just what it is. And the last F is I'm in my fertile years, so I've got two beautiful children. They're aged 5 and 7, and I think most of you would agree here in the room that combining family life and work life is sometimes a struggle. It's not easy, you can try so hard. You want to be the perfect employee, you want to be the perfect mother, but the reality is you'll never get there. The project performance is just not good enough. Dinner is yuck. I'm not eating that. So, I'm trying really hard, but I just don't fit in. And there are many more letters. I've got the 3 F's, but there's also an A. And thank you, Sarah, you mentioned I actually come from the architecture discipline. So I studied architecture, worked as an architect for about 7 years before I decided I'd like to go into sustainability, and did a master's degree in climate engineering. And I came back to Melbourne and was looking for a job, and the response I got was, "But you're an architect. It's got nothing to do with sustainability. What do you mean? We need mechanical engineers. They're the ones who are, saving our planet." So, we're talking here 10 years ago. I'd like to think things changed. So there's the triple Fs, there's the A, there's also a P. So I also worked for some time in the planning field, and that, I guess, was a little bit of a detour until the industry matured and there's finally space for people with a design background in the sustainability space. So coming back to my triple Fs, did I have what it takes to have a successful career in the engineering industry? No, definitely not. Until I found this. I came across this quote, why fit in if you can stand out, as a graffiti at South Yarra Station. And I still remember that day. It was actually a beautiful moment when I realised, hang on, we're actually no longer in the Stone Age. In the Stone Age, it was really critical to fit in, because fitting in meant survival. Whereas where we are today, I guess diversity is, are celebrated. Differences are amazing. They're so important. So I realised I really need to embrace my differences rather than hiding them. So how have these differences worked for me? So I mentioned I'm an architect, so I guess that means I can bring design solutions rather than just technical fixes to the table. I've got a planning background, that means I can navigate approvals processes pretty well. I know what it's like to be on the other side. I'm German. I've got a strong connection to Germany, to the European building industry. That's of great advantage if you work in the sustainability space. And I'm a mother, which taught me a lot of patience, a lot of tolerance, and a lot of efficiency. And all of that is extremely important in the workspace. So I'd like to say I've come to peace with being different. It's actually an opportunity, not a disadvantage anymore. So I've spoken a lot about differences. I've spoken about diversity in our workforce and our society. And I think you'd all agree with me that diversity is a fact. We don't even debate it anymore. But what about equality? Is that a fact? What do you think? I don't think it is. Not yet, at least not when we look at it globally. I'd like to, leave you with that message that diversity is a fact, but equality is a choice. And I'd like to encourage you all making the right choices for yourselves, but also for others. Thank you.
Thanks, Johanna. Okay, well, I think we're ready for a really interesting discussion with our 3 panellists this morning. But firstly, I'll just introduce the theme of this year's International Women's Day to give a bit of context to our panel discussion. So the 2020 theme is drawn from the notion of collective individualism. So we're all parts of a whole. We all have individual actions and conversations and behaviours and mindsets that impact on society as a whole. So collectively, we can actually make change happen, and we can each help create a gender equal world. And we can choose to challenge those stereotypes and fight bias, broaden perceptions, improve situations and celebrate women's achievements together. And this actually brings me to our first question of the morning. Given this year's theme and highlighting an equal world is an enabled world, what does this actually mean to you? What does the theme of the 2020 International Women's Day mean to each of you? Let's start, Carolyn.
Having woken up this morning to stories about a taser incident in a supermarket in Sydney over toilet rolls, but human behaviour and embracing each other and our respective strengths and how we combine those things to do really, really good things, as opposed to creating these elements of exclusiveness and difference. Just think we make things way too complicated and way too hard, and the concept of us all treating each other the way we'd like to be treated ourselves, just cannot fathom that people cannot get their head around that, and it would just be the most powerful but simple thing that we could all do.
For me, it's about helping others up. So I've been mentoring young women for the past 10 years across government, academia, private sector, who want to improve their sustainability leadership skills. And for me, Each for Equal is allowing those women to step up and feel confident within themselves and challenge themselves and go for their next step. And just to be heard as well. It's amazing when I speak to a lot of young women that they have a lack of confidence, they're not sure how to network and meet people. So it's about helping others so that they can step up and feel great about themselves, but also be great leaders too.
Sorry, yes, it is working. Look, I've been reflecting on it a lot, Each for Equal, and I guess maybe again that's me coming from a foreign background. I think about individual words, and I was thinking about equality and differences and diversity and how does it all come together. And no doubt equality is extremely important, but I guess the big question is how do we achieve equality despite the diversity? And I just wanted to emphasise that it's really important to believe that both is possible, that we can be equal despite being different.
Mm. So Rebecca, you mentioned that you mentor women in your career. And I think as an organisation in the construction industry, NDY and others in our industry, we struggle to attract women and get our fair share of the available women in industry. So if we step back and reflect, how do we actually encourage more women and girls to step into our industry and make it a career?
Yeah, great question. So I do mentoring formally through the IMNIS mentoring program, but also informally if a young woman approaches me and asks for assistance. And what I've found through the IMNIS mentoring program is that we don't encourage young women at high school or even primary school age to consider science, engineering, or all the STEM subjects anyway, as a career path forward. And the IMNIS program, you can Google it after this session, to the Academy of Science and Technology, is trying to shift that through having incursions at a range of schools across Australia to encourage young girls into coding, engineering, medicine, science, you name it, chemistry, to increase the levels of women in science. And it's an actual fact globally, there are less women in science, in STEM, than men. So we need to shift that and provide the education opportunities for young girls globally.
And have you found the same?
Well, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. But the other thing I would say is the feeder degrees into property and construction have been near 50-50 in terms of their intake for about 10 years. So it's not people doing the degree and it's not people finding a role from graduate into the industry, it's the retention rate. And if we could keep 50% of the women who actually come, we wouldn't have the problem that we have now. So it's actually at an employment level and a promotion level and a talent retention level where the industry has a problem. And without wanting to dull down what's been a really good conversation, all of those employer groups that need to have a good hard look about what they're doing in their own environment to have those women do all the work of getting a degree, getting a job and then leave. Because they're actually going to work somewhere else in a different industry. They're not going to be Betty Homemaker somewhere, they're actually working somewhere else. Property Council did a whole heap of data on that. So it's, we need more, but once we've got them, we've got to be able to keep them.
Just to add to that, I fully agree with you. It's about supporting women, I guess, to be able to look after their children when they're at that age, or even their parents at a later age. But equally, it's also supporting men and allowing men to take on that role of looking after children and looking after parents. Because in my experience, I've got a lot of friends who are now staying at home because their husbands do not have the flexibility to work, reduced hours or to work from home. So it needs to be an offer for both genders.
In the government setting, they're trying to improve that. So last week, the Gender Equity Bill was passed in the Victorian Parliament. So it's trying to address all the issues that you just raised, Joanna. And I know I have a friend who job shares her CEO role with another woman. So it's actually thinking, when I was talking about before, thinking in that grey space in between the binary opposition, it's what different possibilities are available for both men and women or anyone on the gender spectrum in organisations so that they can be a parent. I know in government, the guys get at least 6 weeks off for parental leave, but why not a whole year, just like the women or anyone on the gender spectrum as well? So I think it's about thinking about those solutions and ways that we can ensure that anyone has a job in the future. Yeah.
So how have each of you managed your progressions in your careers? And as we get older and our lives outside of work have a greater impact on work, so whether it's children or ageing parents, how do you actually manage that and still maintain a high-level career?
Do you?
Well, I actually like how you address you're probably not doing both 100%, and I think that you might have to make sacrifices in either home or work. How do we find that balance? How do we as an employer help our staff find that balance themselves?
Look, I've never had a plan, a career plan, and I've sort of found my way into different things, and certainly the progression that I had at Growcon was not me applying, but the business recognising that I was suited to other things or had more potential, and I've been lucky that I've had someone who was sort of watching that. So I'm not a good case in point of what to do. It's sort of a bit of pot kettle, don't do what I'm doing, have a plan and do all those sort of things. But I actually think at a really human level that most good people, and we should only want to work with good people, they actually are interested in the people they work with being happy. So being really realistic about what your own expectations are of yourself and what your commitments are outside of work is really easy. And a very basic example of that, our daughter is 12. I went back to work when she was 4 months old. My husband had some long service leave. He took that. It was one of the best things we ever did because we've been very equal parents since then. That first week, he was ringing me 5 times a day to talk about where stuff was. And I think by about day 4, he just thought it was hideously embarrassing that he had to ring me about these basic things. And then he became very independent and sort of said, well, it doesn't matter what happens, I'm not going to call her, which was, it was sort of funny and all that sort of stuff. But at that time, I remember, getting home, having that bit of working mother guilt about being home late or travelling interstate and all that stuff. And the result of that was on the nights that I'm home in Melbourne, and it's, the witching hour, the bathing, the bed, the dinner, the phone would be ringing, and it was really hard not to answer it because you kind of wanted to be available to everybody, but you actually can't be available to everyone all the time. And so I was really honest with people of saying, you know what, actually, I've just got home, I've got Ellie in the bath, can I call you back? Now, there's no one who says to you, no, I actually need to talk to you right now. Now, short of a disaster, an Armageddon, the concept of just being really honest about what have you got on today, what's on for the weekend, can you do whatever, and outlining for people the other things that are going on. With information, most people are capable of making the right decisions. if you hold information back from people, they form their own conclusions about what you could or should be doing, and that's putting yourself and them really at a disadvantage. So whether it's, I've got a child in the bath, do I really need to talk to you now, or my mum's unwell, I need to leave early today, it's all, you don't need to make it as hard as we do. Having said that, there are some people out there who are not good people and you shouldn't work with them.
I tend to agree. So, from an organisational perspective, you're setting that expectation or the boundaries around work and personal life, but I think those boundaries blurring as time goes on, that we're needing to be available 24/7. So how do each of you, Rebecca and Johanna, how do you set boundaries so that you maintain that work-life balance, but you're still focused on your career and you're still progressing and heading in the right direction?
So I never had work-life balance. I just was I'm very aspirational, so I go head into everything that I do. An example is my PhD. I did my PhD part-time because I didn't have a scholarship, and I worked 2 other part-time jobs at the same time as a marine scientist, and there was absolutely no balance. And I burnt out, and I learned in quite a bad way what that does to your body, mentally and physically. But even though I learned that lesson, I still didn't change. And it's actually not until this year that I've actually stopped and looked after my health. So what I do is I turn my screens off at 8 p.m. every night and just have time out for myself, with my husband, just talking about things or reading books, whatever it might be. So I think that's really healthy and something that I'm trying to do more and more. In terms of the workplace, I work with a lot of millennials, and that's a positive thing, it's not a negative thing. And what I'm actually observing is that the millennials actually set boundaries for themselves about how they want to work and when they want to work. One of the guys I work with, he only wants to work 4 days a week because he wants to be a dad on the 5th day of the week. That's great, and we fully support that. Another millennial that I work with, she's really clear about she doesn't want to be contacted after certain hours, and that's okay. So I think there's a lot of things that I can learn from the younger generation about setting boundaries. And I'm slowly learning.
Interesting. Setting boundaries. Look, it's a difficult one, no doubt, and I often think technology is a curse and a blessing at the same time. It's a blessing in terms of that we can, be on Skype calls while we're on the train, while we're driving the car, while we're making breakfast in the morning. But yet it's a curse as well, because there's kind of that feeling that you need to be available 24/7, and I have to admit it's a difficult one. Sorry, I can't share any wisdom on this one, how to do it better. Still, I think we have a conversation afterwards, yeah? Good.
The other thing I think I would add, and picking up a couple of those themes, I think now more than ever we have much more freedom to design for ourselves what success looks like. That idea that in past generations, being successful meant that you did this, then you did that, then you got married, then you bought a house, then you had kids, then you did whatever. Like, there's so many different ways that we all live, and there's much more respect and, I think, tolerance for that. It's not perfect for all the reasons that we've talked about. But I think if you can be clear in your own mind about what does success look like for you and what are the things that you want to do with your time, the little bit of time that we all have on the planet, setting that up and then making your decisions through that framework. And that's not to say that what success looks like now is the same as what success is going to look like in 10 years' time, but we should definitely not fall into the trap that success for that person needs to be success for me. So there are people who, to your point, they want to work 4 days a week. They make sacrifices that go with that, typically around remuneration and sometimes around progression. But if that's what success looks like for that person, then who are we to say that it should be different than that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I have high expectations of myself, and I have to stop and catch myself to realise that others don't have the same expectations of themselves as I set for myself. And when you come to that realisation and respect that, I feel a lot calmer. So it's about accepting, I think you mentioned before in your speech, Johanna, about accepting the diversity. It's not just the cultural diversity, but the diversity of thought and approaches to careers and progression as well, online progression.
Great points. And on that note, I might actually throw to the floor and see if we've got any questions. Amanda?
Organisations offering different workplace cultures, balance, sort of respecting people's different views. But how much of the challenge is client-driven in the construction sector?
I think increasingly what you will see is sophisticated clients are looking more and more at supply chain, who they're buying services from and how those businesses are run. So whether it's government-led at a Commonwealth level, the amount of Indigenous content that's in firms and products, we will get to a stage where everything is being measured. So gender, other diversity, mental health programs, all that kind of qualitative factors around what sort of organisation are you really, all of that will be looked at in a much more forensic way as we move forward than it has been in the past. It's really shining a light on who do we want to partner with, and I think that's only a good thing. To the extent that these things aren't being looked at, talked about, it's kind of been allowed to sort of prosper in a really bad way. But once we start concentrating on that and sophisticated clients are looking through those sort of things, there'll be a different focus on it. And, you know, unfortunately, unless we actually measure these things, they don't tend to get managed in large corporates. And when that starts to turn, which it is turning, like the banks are under a lot of, for all the right reasons, under a lot of pressure to explain why they're good organisations, why they should have a social licence to operate, who's in their organisation, right through to where are they buying services from overseas. That will start to come through Australian companies as well.
From a procurement point of view from government, it's exactly what Carolyn just mentioned. We look at service providers who are from Indigenous backgrounds, ensuring that there's no modern slavery going on. What's the diversity and gender equity in that organisation? What's their supply chain like? What are the sustainability values and ethics of that organisation? So all these elements are now coming into the procurement approaches in government, and we have very, very strict policies around that.
Any other questions? Thank you. I'll welcome Joss back to the stage.
So I come here to close this morning and thank our three panellists, Carolyn, Rebecca and Johanna. So today is just one day where we stop and reflect. It's one day. What we do go forward matters, but please take this time to enjoy it. We have plenty of toilet paper, no tasers, and plenty of food. So thank you very much.